What's happening, everybody? Welcome back to this vlog. And the goal of the video today is help you guys understand all the different types of terminology that are in the game. Things like critical damage amplifiers, standard ballistic damage, ADS ballistic damage, and so on and so on and so on. So hopefully this will help somebody out there after we get done with the video, and you guys will have a better understanding of all of the things in the game. So I think it's pretty standard for everybody to understand what HP, which is the amount of life your character has, your attack, which is going to increase your damage, and then of course your defenses, which is going to make your character a lot tankier. But this is where it gets a little bit more interesting, where we get into the special. Now, critical rate is something that most players know, especially if they've been playing games for a long time. Critical rate is a number that is shown to give you a certain chance to be able to do a critical hit. Now, what's a critical hit? A critical hit is your normal damage multiplied by your critical damage. So for example, if you do 1,000 damage with one shot, and you have 10% critical damage. Well, you take 1,000 times 10%, which equals 100. And then you would take your normal damage, which would be 1,000, add 100, which is your critical damage. And then you're going to have 1,100 for a critical hit. Okay, so the higher the number this is, the more often you're going to do critical hits, which means a whole lot more damage. Now, something to understand about Snowbreak is that you have different types of guns. So pistols will do one shot at a time, shotguns do one shot at a time, and machine guns are going to do rapid fire. So they're more than likely going to have less critical rate than, say, characters that only do shots of one at a time, like snipers and shotguns and pistols and so on. Right? Obviously, the more shots that are fired, the more often you're going to be able to do a critical hit. So they probably have the critical rate lower on these characters, on submachine gun characters and assault rifle characters versus pistol, shotgun, and sniper because of that reason. And then you get into critical damage amplifiers. Now, my life doesn't have a critical damage amplifier, but what this is, guys, is this percentage that you would see here. So let me jump on to this girl right here. This percentage that you'll see here, this critical damage amplifier, like this 7.4%, you would take this and you would actually multiply it by your actual critical damage, okay? So if you took 60% times 7.4%, you would get 4.4%. So what you would do is you would take this 60% plus another 4.4%, and now your critical damage is actually 64%. So whenever you're doing your figuring, guys, all you gotta do is just take your critical damage amplifier, multiply it times your critical damage, and that will actually give you how much more critical damage you're actually going to get. It's going to give you the subtotal of how much critical damage you're actually going to have. And then we get to U energy recovery. U energy recovery, guys, is the amount of energy your character generates, and this is going to depend on the different types of characters that you're using. Characters that are going to be using, rapid fire, like assault rifles and submachine guns, are going to be scaled differently as far as how fast they build up your energy versus characters like sniper, shotgun, and pistol, because they do one shot at a time. Your stamina is this little meter that's going to be on the screen. That is, the amount of time that you can actually run, that you can actually roll. When you run out of stamina, you can't roll, you can't run, you get exhausted, you get tired. So the more stamina, I believe all of these are at 200 right now currently in the game, but I could be wrong about that. Whenever you run out of stamina, you just won't be able to run, you'll be tired, you won't be able to roll. So this is a really cool thing in the game where you have to use a lot of skill. Make sure you dodge at the appropriate times. Let your stamina build back up so you can always dodge to get out of danger. Kinetic resistance and thermal resistance, frost resistance, electrical and chaos. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Obviously, if a character has any of these on them, they're going to be resistant to that type of damage. And then we get into skill haste. So skill haste is the amount of extra cooldown that's going to be applied to your standard skill. And the way to figure this out, guys, is you take the cooldown of the skill. So for example, Fredia's cooldown is 25 seconds on her standard skill. And what you would do is you would take 25 divided by 1.135. 13.5 is the skill haste, so it'd be 1.135, and you would actually get 22 seconds. So whenever you're playing with this character, you'll notice that she'll have a 22-second cooldown on her standard skill. Your S energy recovery, guys, is the amount of energy you actually recover per second, and your auxiliary units are what you use for your standard skill. Those are your auxiliary units. So like, for example, in Life's case, it's her wolf fangs. These are her auxiliary units that she actually uses, right? Anytime you use an auxiliary unit, their strength is going to go up if you have an increase to your auxiliary units power here. The alignment index is actually based off how many neuronics you actually have leveled up. So whenever you go to your neuronics, the more of these neuronics that you have leveled up, the higher your alignment index is. And the more index that you have, the more bonuses you're going to get for damage for your character. So it's going to be really, really important to have as much alignment index as possible for your characters. Compatibility is actually a really interesting thing, because when it comes to compatibility, this is what you can use to actually figure out the damage of a shot that you're actually doing with your characters. So what you do is you take this number 27.5 and you would actually multiply it by the attack of the character. So in Life's case, again, I mean, I just forgot what that was. So in Life's case, it'd be 27.5, right? So I would take 27.5% and I would multiply it times her attack times 2936, and that gives me 807 damage per shot. That's what she's going to do per shot. Now keep in mind, this doesn't take into account your critical hits. Okay, this is just your normal damage output per shot. So it's a pretty cool way for you to figure out how strong your character is per shot by looking at the compatibility of them and multiplying your compatibility times the amount of attack that you have on your character, and that's how much damage you're going to do per shot with your character. It's actually a pretty cool little thing that they have. The rate of fire is how many times you would shoot if you had a full round of these. So if I had 950 shots, this is how many shots that Life would do in 1 minute. If this says 60, you would do 60 shots in 1 minute. If it said 80, you would do 80 shots in 1 minute. And then obviously damage type, pretty self-explanatory. The max range, this is actually where it shows you how far your character can shoot. Now, if you want to look at more detail, you would close this out, you would go to weapons, you would hit train, and then we go to parameters, and you can actually see how well the weapon will shoot at a certain distance. So for Life's weapon with the submachine gun, at about 30 m is really where it's really accurate and very powerful. It starts dropping off between 30 and 60, and then beyond 60, she won't even hit her target, right? So if we go to another character, we take a look at Yao here, and we take a look at her weapon, right? We look at the parameters on this thing. You can see that up to 120 meters, this thing is dead on, and it can shoot up to 200 m. I said meters, but 200 m, you know, but it's the damage is going to drop off as you get to 200 m. But anything beyond 200 m, she won't be able to hit that target. So this is a nice little thing that they put in here so you know how far your character can actually shoot, which is a nice little thing that they have in the game. And then we go down here, we take a look at the ammo capacity, and all this is just how many bullets your cartridge holds or how many bullets your gun holds, and your reload speed is just how long it takes for your character to reload the weapon. So obviously Live, she's just going to change the cartridge. It takes her 1.4 seconds to change the cartridge. For Yao, it's going to take her 1.8 seconds to reload. If we go to Finny and we take a look at her reload speed, it takes her 2.6 seconds to reload her gun, which makes perfect sense because she's got to keep cocking in those bullets over and over and over as she's loading her gun up. And then critical damage, we've already talked about. So let's get into some other things that people aren't really sure about when it comes to these characters. So the first thing, guys, is when it says things like active skill damage. What is active skill damage? Well, active skill damage, guys, is all of these skills right here. All of these are skills. You have your standard skill, you have your support skill, and you have your ultimate skill. These are all active skills. So when you see an active skill damage increase, you know that all three of these are getting buffed up. All right, not your bullet damage, but all of your active skill damage. And then, of course, your standard skills, your special skill, your ultimate, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. And then your support skills is pretty self-explanatory. So then when we move on to another character here, we see that we have something called ballistic damage. What is ballistic damage? Ballistic damage is a general term used for bullet damage, okay? Whenever you see ballistic damage increase, that is the damage of your bullets actually being increased, not your active skills. Remember, active skills are your support, ultimate, and your standard skill, but ballistic damage is your bullet damage from your projectiles. All right, but then they have other types of ballistic damage in the game. Now, again, this is a general term for an increase to your bullet damage, but then they have what's called adds ballistic damage. Adds stands for aim down sight. So whenever you're playing with the character and you hold the gun, you're pointing in a certain direction, that is when you're aiming down the sights. That is what adds ballistic damage is. Every time you close your sights or you're using your scope on, say, Yao or Marion, sorry, that's when you're actually doing adds ballistic damage. All right, but then they have something else that has a different word. Let me see if I can find a character that has it, like standard ballistic damage. What is standard ballistic damage? Well, standard ballistic damage is actually hit fire damage. And what is hip fire damage? Hip fire is when you're actually just standing in your normal stance and you're just running around and shooting and shooting and shooting. So for a character like Finny, the standard ballistic damage, she's going to do a lot of damage when she's doing this whenever you're not using your closed sights, whenever you're just standing far away and you're just shooting over and over and over with your character. So again, active skill damage is your standard, your ultimate, and your support skills. Ballistic damage is a general term for your increase to your bullet damage. And then standard ballistic damage is hip fire shooting with your character, and adds ballistic damage is when you're closed sights shooting at an opponent. And that concludes all these different types of terminology that the game is offering. If you guys have any other questions about certain things in the game, let me know down in the comments below, and let me know if this did help any of you out there. And I do stream on Twitch at 9 p.m. TD+7 time. The link is in the description below. And I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching. Y'all take care and have a good one. See you, everybody. Take care.